The 1930 penny primarily concerns itself with repunched mintmark varieties, 3 of which are definitely worth searching for. The first of which comes to us from the Denver Mint, and is a D over D repunched mintmark variety where the remaining remnant of the initial D can be seen directly towards the north of the primary D mintmark. This is, of course, the primary identifying feature for the coin. Beyond that, there are also a handful of secondary, confirmatory diagnostic markers that you can look out for. However, most of those tend to fade in or out depending on the die state of the coin in question, so they're not really that hard and fast reliable, except for a die scratch on the top of Lincoln's head, just slightly southwest of the W in we. The obverse also appears to have been paired with at least 2 distinct reverse dies. The first reverse develops a die crack along the right wheat stalk in a later die state, and then presumably that reverse must have failed at some point, as it is then replaced with another secondary reverse when the obverse is in a very late die state. In late 2023, a PCGS graded MS64 red example of this variety coin was sold at auction for the sum of $1,080. And then we have a second repunched mintmark variety from the Denver Mint from the same year. The initial mintmark was punched almost directly towards the north of the final placement. However, this time the repunching is not nearly as prominent as in the previous example. On most coins of this variety, there is only a slight remnant of the initial punching just barely above and slightly towards the right of the top serif of the D mintmark. In this case, the auction record is also a little thin on the ground, as this coin is slightly harder to come by. But in 2023, a PCGS graded AU50 example of this variety coin was sold at auction for $43. And then lastly, we have another repunched mintmark variety, but this time the coin hails from the San Francisco Mint with an S over S repunched mintmark. And again, much like the previous 2 examples from Denver, here too the initial S mintmark was struck in towards the north of the final position, leaving the top section of the secondary S seen peeking out from behind and to the top of the S mintmark. Notable diagnostic points for this coin includes a die scratch just below the leg of the R in trust, running diagonally almost between the R and the U. It has been suggested that this may have been caused by a feeder finger making contact with the obverse die at some point. On the reverse of the coin, there are also 2 markers to confirm your find. These are 2 very small die chips, one really more of a die bump than anything else. First, towards the top of the T in cent, as indicated here, and then another small dot along the diagonal section of the N in cent, almost where the right vertical bar and the diagonal bar meet on the inside of the letter. In 2023, a PCGS graded MS67 red example of this coveted variety coin was sold at auction for the closing price of $6,000. A very unusual case of doubling on the obverse of the 1934 Lincoln penny. This is probably the widest spread on a Lincoln cent that is known, although the doubling does not display nearly as dramatically as, say, the 1955 double die obverse. To locate the doubling on this coin, look below the 3 and the 4 of the date. You should be able to see immediately what appears to be the tail of the number 3 due south of where it is supposed to be. And then towards the right of that position there is another mark that presumably is the tip of the base of the number 4 as well. This variety is extremely hard to find and quite scarce actually, but unfortunately it is also not too well known, and as such not a lot of people are actually looking for it. In 2023, a PCGS graded MS64 red brown example was sold at auction for the sum of $288. Then we also have a double-die obverse variety to look for from the 1934 Denver Mint issue as well. This is a case of distended hub doubling. It is possible that this may have been the end result of a type of flattening of the working hub due to improper annealing, perhaps. At any rate, the end result is a coin where the letters, and especially the date, are all significantly thicker than they really ought to be. If you are having trouble spotting this in isolation, then simply compare it to a known normal coin, and you will clearly be able to see the difference in short order. The date is a particularly noticeable place of interest, especially look to the tail of the number 9 as well as the tail of the number 3 as well. The difference is really quite obvious. Then look towards the letters of Liberty, and you'll see that they too are a lot thicker than they should be, especially on the vertical sections of the letters. Additional thickness is also present in the letters of In God We Trust, but here it is less noticeable than on the date and on Liberty. In 2023, a PCGS graded example of this coin was sold at public auction, where it managed to raise the sum of $1,080 by final bid. Then we stay at the Denver Mint, but this time we can also find a repunched mintmark variety for the 1934D Lincoln penny. Actually, this is a quadruple punched mintmark, so that's a 1934D over D over D over D variety. Now, to be fair, you do need a high grade and early die state coin to be able to see all 4 punchings, but at least the most prominent should be seen even in lower grade examples of this variety coin. That would be the secondary D that displays in the form of, I suppose you could call it a sort of doubling towards the lower half of the D, due south of the final placement. Then there is also another misplaced mintmark, or at least part of one, slightly southeast of the final position. This is just a slight half-moon shaped impression in most cases, and in a later die state this impression does tend to fade almost completely, so don't necessarily rely on it. And then the third impression is actually towards the north of the D mintmark, but just barely at that too. So instead of straining yourself to try and see this one in particular, I'd recommend just looking for the impression towards the south instead in order to identify this variety coin. During 2023, a coin like this, graded as MS64 red-brown by PCGS, was sold at auction for the sum of $601. And then we have another repunched mintmark variety from the 1934 Descent. This one is a lot bolder though, and easier to identify than the previous coin, and not to mention worth a lot more as well. This time the initial impression can be seen directly north of the final placement. In an attractive coin, you should be able to see clearly the remnant of the initial D towards the top, including a portion of the top serif as well. The bottom serif is also seen due north of the final placement, and the bottom section of the D is actually still seen inside the cavity of the final D mintmark. A beautiful variety that is well worth the effort to search for. In 2018, a stunning example of this coin, the finest known of its type, was sold at auction, graded by PCGS as MS67 red, for $3,745. However, it should also be noted that in 2023, the exact same coin was again offered on the open market, and this time it achieved a closing price at auction of $1,680. 1935 really only has one variety that is worth your effort to search for. This is the 1935 double die obverse, and actually has some very attractive doubling on several of the obverse design elements. This is a clear instance of class 5 or pivoted hub doubling, with the pivot point near the 4 o'clock position on the obverse. As such, there is very little to no noticeable doubling on the letters of liberty to speak of. However, there is increasingly strong doubling on the letters of in God we trust. As you move from left to right, the letters of in have some very minor doubling, but nothing really worth pointing out in the greater context of this coin. The letters of God is where the doubling really becomes more noticeable, especially on the D, which begins to display the doubling a little stronger. The G and O are really only affected by slight separation lines on the bottom of the letters. Since the rotation of the second squeezing in the hubbing process took place in a clockwise direction, the doubling here displays towards the left of the affected letters. The W and E of we is a good example of just that. And then the letters of trust are the furthest away from the pivot point on the coin, so as expected, the doubling here is in fact the strongest. The first T, the R, the U, and the S in particular are all doubled in a very attractive manner, and also demonstrates the clockwise rotation in question in the most effective manner. Looking at this, you can clearly imagine that between the first and the second squeezing of the working die during the hubbing process, a slight clockwise rotation took place, leading to what we see here as doubling on the letters. But that is not the only area of the coin that was affected. The date is also doubled quite clearly, and this is likely where you would first notice the doubling when searching for the variety as well. The 9 of the date is doubled towards the top, and the tail of the number is also doubled, although to a slightly lesser degree. The 3 is doubled in much the same fashion, though since its tail runs more horizontally when compared to the tail of the 9, it displays in a more dramatic fashion. And then the 5 is also doubled much the same manner as the 3 just described. In addition to all of this, Lincoln's eyelid also received some minor doubling, with the lid doubled towards the top. Most coins seen have a die crack that develops along the edge of Lincoln's bust, just above the designer's initials of VDB. In a later die state, the crack actually becomes more noticeable and extends into the field just below Lincoln's bust. During 2023, a PCGS graded MS66 red example of this coin was sold at auction for the sum of $2,340. Variety coins you can look for from the 1936 penny. Our first coin to look for is a rather attractive doubled obverse example where the doubling is actually quite strong and displays towards the northeast on most of the obverse design, including the date, the letters of liberty, and in God we trust. Every number of the date is in fact doubled. However, the 1, the 9 and the 6 are typically the strongest, or rather I should say display in the most dramatic fashion. The letters of liberty are also doubled in a similar manner, but in a coin that has seen extensive circulation or where this might be more difficult to see. Although the letters should display additional thickness that should betray the doubling in a lower grade all the same. The letters of In God We Trust, however, are doubled very strongly and should not have any similar concerns regardless of grade. And I'll even argue that it is easier to see the doubling here as opposed to on the date adjusted for size, with the wide spread displayed beautifully towards the right hand side of the letters of In God, while the doubling on the letters of We Trust is displayed more towards the top of the letters due to the way that those elements are oriented in relation to the rest of the design. The finest certified example of this coin was sold on a PCGS slab in 2023 with the grade of MS67 Red when it attained a closing price at auction of $34,800. On the second noteworthy example that is available to look for, with the 1936 penny, there are some similarities to the coin we just looked at. On this coin, though, the date has a very wide spread and is consequently doubled quite dramatically, mostly towards the southeast this time. Though all of the numbers are affected, the top curl of the 9, the bottom left rounding of the 6, and to a lesser extent, the bottom rounding of the 3, not only display separation lines, but actually achieve near separation between the two impressions. The letters of Liberty are also doubled to a significantly lesser degree, though additional thickness is the main hallmark here. But in this case, there is a unique diagnostic point to look out for. The bottom right half of the left leg of the letter R is fractured, or what is more commonly referred to as a broken leg R, the result of a small defect during the hubbing process. Now, the only real doubling to report on the letters of In God We Trust appears on the RUST section of Trust, where additional thickness and minor separation lines can be detected to the bottom right side of the letters, especially the U and the S of that word. An example of this coin was sold at auction in 2020, graded by PCGS as MS66 Plus Red for the sum of $3,960. For the third variety coin, the doubling is mostly concentrated on the letters of In God We Trust. But before we get to that, let's take a look at the letters of Liberty first. Here too, we can see that the R has a broken left leg, much like the coin we looked at just before, although the doubling on Liberty is not as pronounced as it was before. And on this coin, the doubling on the date is absent completely. So I'll say that it's a good way to tell these three varieties apart right here, relatively at a glance. But back to the letters of In God We Trust. Here, the doubling is strongest on the In God We section, where the doubling displays mostly towards the left of the letters. In 2021, this MS66 Plus Red graded example of the coin was sold at auction slabbed by PCGS for the sum of $2,520. Penny varieties worth money from 1938. Now, this year chiefly concerns itself with mintmark varieties, so be sure to check all of those 1938 S and D mintmark coins that you happen to come across, just to be sure. First in line will be the stop at the Denver Mint for this D over D repunched mintmark variety. On this coin, the initial mintmark was punched in directly towards the west of the primary impression. The spread was wide enough and the impression strong enough so that you can still see the upright vertical bar as well as the top serif of the initial impression towards the left of the main D mintmark. And the same can be said for a coin in both a top tier grade and a lower circulating grade, where the repunching remains equally as visible regardless. In 2022, a PCGS graded MS66 Red example of this coin was sold at auction for the sum of $275. Moving further west to the San Francisco Mint for another repunched mintmark variety, this S over S 1938 penny is fairly easy to identify by a strong repunched mintmark of the S that appears due north of the final impression. The remnant of the initial S appears slightly thinner due to the fact that the impression was not made deep enough. Although the key consideration for this issue is the die state of the example that you might come across. As in early die states, the repunching is remarkably clear, but as the die state of the coin advances, the repunching becomes increasingly less dramatic in appearance, though you should still be able to discern it as long as you know what to look for. In 2023, a PCGS graded coin in a grade of MS67 plus red was sold at auction for the amount of $720. And then another repunched mint mark variety from the San Francisco Mint is actually a triple punched mint mark variety, or stated more plainly, an S over S over S 1938 penny. Here, the initial and secondary impressions are both practically due west of the primary S mint mark, with one being only slightly more towards the left than the other one. You can see the top rounding and the bottom serif of the secondary S very clearly, and then the remnants of the secondary or tertiary S, which are slightly more fragmented, but equally as clear upon inspection as well. Here too, the repunching is not affected by grade, and a coin in a well or average circulated grade will still display the repunching every bit as clear as a coin that is in a mint state grade. This example of the variety was sold at auction in 2023, graded by PCGS as MS67 red, where it obtained a closing price of $480. We now take a look at Lincoln cent variety coins from 1939. And while there are a number of more minor varieties, doubled eyelets and the like, there really is only one variety that pulls any kind of attention at all. That is the 1939 doubled obverse variety coin, a coin that is a bit of an odd duck as it is a combined variety, displaying symptoms of both Class 1 and the far lesser known Class 8 hub doubling. Now, Class 8 hub doubling is what is better known as tilted hub doubling, which explains why the rotated doubling is only seen on some parts of the coin and not the entire design. We'll begin with the date, where the doubling is only displayed on the numbers 1 and 9, and only towards the top right of the 19 as well. The 9 looks to have a bit of a horn peeking out from its top, and the 1 is doubled towards the northeast, but only, once again, the top half of the number is really affected. On a lower grade, and most certainly on the lower state coin, as the example towards your left now will demonstrate, the doubling on the 9 should remain clear, although it might be a little less dramatic, but the doubling on the 1 might fade out altogether. Moving on from there towards the letters of Liberty, where the last several letters, especially the E, R, T, and Y are all doubled to varying degrees, becoming more noticeable towards the center of the design. Usually the T and the Y are the strongest, and as you can see on the lower grade coin, those are really the best indicators on this particular part of the design. In addition to that, and honestly, this is usually what I look for first, is Lincoln's eyelid is also doubled quite strongly towards the north. Look right in the protected sunken area right below the ridge of his eyebrow to see the doubling. And because of the placement of the doubling, it remains detectable in any grade or die state that the coin might be in. In 2019, a coin matching this description, graded by PCGS as MS67 plus red, was sold at auction for the sum of $2,350. Subscribe to WNN and activate notifications with the bell icon to know when new videos are released. For the World Numismatic News, I am Numisman saying thank you for watching, keep collecting, and have a fantastic day.